All right, just got out of Black Phone 2, early morning screening, very Nightmare on Elm Street. It answers some questions from the first one. I really enjoyed the first movie. I think I still prefer the first a little more suspense, way more grounded. This definitely takes that turn and runs with it. I thought the nightmare sequences were filmed excellently. I like the style of this movie overall. It did feel like the story dragged a little more than I anticipated. I saw that trailer and said, oh, they're taking this in a really cool direction. And it was cool. But at the same time, I wanted the story to move a little quicker. We don't get to see a ton of the grabber. It's definitely building that suspense all throughout the movie. We'll talk more in the actual review. Maybe a little disappointed based on expectations, but it was a solid thriller experience. Not too many scares. All right, so the grabber has returned, but this time in your dreams. That's right, I'm dreaming about the grabber.
You what?
So many jokes I can make about that name. This is Black Phone 2, not the Black Phone. The is gone. It's just Black Phone 2. I had to think about that.
Have you heard of the grabber? I killed him.
All right, so Finn's back. He's struggling with his life after captivity, and his sister begins receiving calls in her dreams from the Black Phone and seeing disturbing visions of 3 boys being stalked at a winter camp known as Alpine Lake. Now, this winter camp makes for an interesting setting. I mean, aesthetically, you have just this darkness and claustrophobic feeling the entire time you're watching. There's one scene where it just shows the wind blowing and the snow slightly falling outside, and you're just like, that in itself is haunting. And then you add in the grabber, and it's just silly grabber.
You get your fucking hands off me.
So like I said, Mason Thames returns here. This is, I think, 3 or 4 years after defeating the grabber, so all is well. But his sister, who's really kind of the main character of this movie, I mean, she's the one having the weird dreams. And what happens in these dreams is, well, she's getting attacked. Horrible things are being seen. And the violence is very gratuitous against children in those sequences to the point to where it made me feel uncomfortable. I wasn't as scared in this movie as I wanted to be. The sequences, while unnerving, they weren't unnerving to the point to where I felt a lot of fear. It was more uncomfortable brutality, and I do think the grabber is a very sinister, evil horror villain, and they're really trying to push that on the outside with the marketing and in the movie itself as like this haunting figure that now isn't just a living, breathing psychopath. He is now an entity, Michael Myers style, Freddy Krueger style. This is very Nightmare on Elm Street. Absolutely. A guy who can kill you in your dreams, can harm you in your dreams, but can also escape that and come into reality. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of where this film goes and where the lore takes his character, but there were some things about it that weren't fully explained to where they made a ton of sense. That said, this film, I think, was solely created, well, it was created because the first movie did very well, but was solely created to kind of give us some more lore regarding this entity known as the grabber. And while Ethan Hawke plays the grabber and has that sinister voice, especially throughout this movie with some phone calls, you hear Ethan Hawke, you're like, oh, there he is. There's the grabber. Ethan Hawke's probably not in this movie enough for me to say, Ethan Hawke, the grabber, incredible. It's more so this slow build of this girl having these dreams, everybody kind of funneling to this location where a lot of this went down, and then figuring out the mystery of how we're going to take down the entity, at this point, the entity known as the grabber, who, played this more sinister and down-to-earth, grounded character in the first movie, and that's what I loved about the first one so much. It's just very simple when you go back and rewatch it, but I love the execution there. Simplicity can be key sometimes in a really good horror movie, and that first one did the job. This takes it, makes the story bigger, a bit more grand, even though maybe even less characters at play. We're all in this one location. It feels claustrophobic. The idea of the grabber is massive because we're going into people's nightmares now. And those nightmare sequences, the way that they filmed this, the grain, the look, the feel, it felt very nightmarish while we're getting that, along with that score and even some moments that are very silent. I liked that a lot. There's a surprising amount of style in this movie. And even though I didn't quite like the story, as much as the first. Not that it gets overly complicated, but maybe a little more than it needed to be, where the first was just so simple and so wonderful in that way. Now, a lot of people are going to prefer that, and I've heard a lot of people that like Black Phone 2 a lot more, to each their own. But at the same time, I do wish that slow buildup didn't feel as slow as it actually did. We're kind of meandering and plotting at a point, and while we're getting these moments and these nightmare sequences that are really cool, I'm sitting here thinking, all right, where's the grabber? I'm sitting here thinking, all right, we were promised answers, and we do get some answers, but I'd like to inject a little more into these moments that are quiet and should feel more personal, but the script doesn't quite give our characters enough to do or say in those moments that feel vital to the plot and script. Now, I do like the addition of humor. There are actually some, I wouldn't say jokes, but some moments that land in that way and had me giggling, and the entire theater was giggling, all three of us. I watched an early screening, so I didn't expect a lot of people to be there, so me and two other people were like, haha, Thames is solid. McGraw is solid. I like Scott Derickson returning here. He injected just enough into there to make me feel like, all right, this has that style. Maybe not as much substance as the script believes that it has, but I like the injection of style. And anytime we get those really scary scenes and moments that will crawl under your skin, maybe didn't quite impact me on the level that I needed, but it's going to work for a lot of people. And so Derickson does a nice job. Again, it's definitely a studio horror sequel where they wanted them to make one regardless of what the story is. But there is enough here expanding on the lore that does make it at least interesting enough to say, all right, they didn't shoehorn this story, and it does kind of make sense, but it goes more mystical, and it does kind of take away from what I love so much about the first, and that in itself was a little disappointing. We've seen Nightmare on Elm Street. We've seen a very similar horror premise that, and not that other movies can't do it, but that this looks at and says, all right, we're going to take that concept and we're going to try to implement it with the grabber here, and it does that, right? But that also makes for some fun moments, especially for those who are looking for a very similar flavor of that, but again, stylistically, very different. So Black Phone 2, in a way, was a little disappointing. I definitely wanted to be scared more. I wanted to feel horrified a bit more, but that doesn't take the tension that it builds lightly, because it does a nice job of that, has a lot of style, has really good performances. Ethan Hawke is really good. It's just, that could have been anybody. Before giving my final rating, I'd love to know what you think of Black Phone 2. Good, better, worse than the first? What happened to the in the title? And leave your thoughts. Share this video, comment, drop a like. YouTube things. You get it. Black Phone 2 has just enough style and a slow injection of horrifying imagery to keep fans invested in this franchise. The performances are solid, and Hawke is menacing when he eventually shows up. The main issue spawned from a somewhat lackluster script and straying so far away from what I loved from the first. That said, there's no denying the craft on display, and you can at least appreciate a new twist on some familiar ideas that longtime horror fans know exactly what this movie is pulling from. All right, thanks so much for watching. What else comes out this weekend? I don't know. We'll figure it out. I'll talk about it. Bye-bye.